So Elizabeth Warren made headlines with her comments on the Electoral College. This is interesting. Watch.
And that is, I believe we need a constitutional amendment that protects the right to vote for every American citizen and to make sure that vote gets counted. We need to put some federal muscle behind that. And we need to repeal every one of the voter suppression laws that is out there right now. And I'll tell you one more. We need to make sure that every vote counts. And I want to push that right here in Mississippi, because I think this is an important point. You know, come a general election, presidential candidates don't come to places like Mississippi.
That's true.
Yeah. They also don't come to places like California and Massachusetts, right? Because we're not the battleground states. Well, my view is that every vote matters. And the way we can make that happen is that we can have national voting, and that means get rid of the Electoral College and every vote counts. Yep. Everybody.
I want to.
I think everybody ought to have to come and ask for your vote. What do you think? Yeah.
That was quite the reaction. Now, there's this weird, I don't know, taboo on talking about this issue, and people assume that the polls show that, you know, the Electoral College is massively popular. It's not. In fact, it's the opposite. People really do prefer the popular vote to the Electoral College. So, I mean, it's like 62% or so is the number. And yeah, on principle, I mean, I really think that the only way you really stay true to one person, one vote is if you have the popular vote be the way to go. And for the record, there's been multiple elections since the turn of the century where the person who got the most votes didn't win. Al Gore got more votes than George W. Bush. I think it was at least 500,000 more votes. And then, of course, there's the example of Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump in terms of the popular vote. But because of the way that the Electoral College works, I mean, it's theoretically possible for a candidate to get, like, I don't know the exact number, so don't quote me, but I remember I was discussing this at one time a while back, and I was floored by how it's theoretically possible. I think my brother-in-law was talking to me about this. How it's theoretically possible for somebody to get like next to no votes and still win the presidency simply because of the way the Electoral College works. And I think the point I want to hammer away on is that any arguments to the contrary, you have to understand, any arguments to the contrary against the popular vote, you're working backwards from your conclusion of the person with fewer votes should be able to win. I mean, no matter how you slice it or dice it, the core of the argument has to be, I think the person with fewer votes should be able to win. Okay, but just acknowledge it is my point. Don't, like, pretend like your highfalutin rationalizations are anything but that, because that's what they are. And there's a funny point that people bring up, which I think is really terrible. Like, it's just such a bad point that it almost is hard to come up with a reaction to it because it's so bad. Because it's such a bad point, it actually stops you in your tracks. And you're like, did you really make that bad of a point? Where people say, you know, like, oh, but if we move away from the Electoral College, you'd ignore so many places where there's not that many people in this country. To which the response is, right now, they ignore places where there's the most people. Like, which would be a bigger concern? You're going to ignore the places where there's very few people, or, as we have it right now, they ignore the places where there's a tremendous number of people. In the general election, California, which has population 18 zillion, And New York, which is population 14 zillion, nobody comes here. Nobody comes here. Nobody cares because, they're locked up in that direction. So what are we going to do? Or, Texas, same thing. So many people there. And president's candidate is like, nope, not going. What? There's so many people there. Yeah, but it's a given it's going to go in, to Republicans. So what are we going to do? No, they should have to go where there's all the people. Like, really? We're going to act like, I guess Ohio's one swing state. But there are a lot of swing states that have really not that big of a population, and they get way more, campaign time and way more attention from the candidates. And ultimately, that's a little bit silly, to be honest. Like, okay, the place that has very few people is getting almost all the attention. I think it's ridiculous. So I would be in favor of that. Honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. So this whole conversation is like, we're just listening to ourselves talk. I really don't think it's going to happen that we're going to move away from the Electoral College. I think the only way that would happen is in the rare instance where a Republican wins the popular vote but loses the Electoral College. And that is super rare. I think that's the only way that we'll get change, because the Republicans would actually be proactive in fighting for it. With the Democrats, they didn't even talk about it after Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. They didn't even mention it. So I really don't think it's going to happen, but one of the more important changes that I think actually has a chance of passing is ranked choice voting. So that's one that should get a hell of a lot more conversation, because I actually really enjoy the topic of, hey, who's your second favorite? Who's your third favorite? Who's your fourth favorite? And we've been talking about that on this show quite a bit, where, my number one is Bernie Sanders. And then there's a question. Who should be your number two? That sounds kind of dirty, but you get the point. Who should be your number two? Tulsi, Elizabeth Warren, Andrew Yang, some other candidate, Buttigieg, who some people are now taking a liking to. So, and that conversation is utterly frivolous until we get ranked choice voting and it really matters.